Now, to our first story of the day. A massive fire at oil mining license 18 field in Buguma, Asari Toru local government area of Rivers State has this week been reminding all about the mind-bending scale of environmental degradation, which years of official neglect has wrought on the Niger Delta, Nigeria's version of the Gulf of Mexico. President Bola Tinubu has this past week been reaching out to leaders and other stakeholders of Ogoni land to assuage frayed nerves and to communicate plans by his government to resume oil exploration in the community. The president is quoted as having told them, "We can't heal past wounds if we continue to be angry." This is in clear reference to years-long chain of events which has seen relationships irretrievably breaking down and even claiming the lives of some notable Ogoni leaders, including the world-renowned playwright and poet Ken Saro. The leader's response to President Tinubu's appeal and/or directive has been straight to the point. Your directive is putting the cart before the horse. The aggrieved community and even environment-focused NGOs are demanding expedited action on an ecological cleanup project there, which was commissioned a few years ago, as well as compensation for victims of what has been acknowledged as the most devastating environmental calamity in the world. I'm now being joined to take a close look at this matter by Legborsi Saro Pyagbara, a former president of the Movement for the Survival of Ogoni People, MOSOP for short, a pioneer member of the Governing Council of the Hydrocarbon Pollution Remediation Project, member Global Climate Action Program of the Climate Investment Funds, chairman, United Nations Voluntary Funds for Indigenous Peoples, and executive director, African Indigenous Foundation for Energy and Sustainable Development. Great to have you this evening on This Day Live, this Sunday talk show, Mr. Legborsi. You're welcome.
Oh, thank you, Abati, and good afternoon.
Yeah, very good, Mr. Legborsi. Well, you have quite a long list of credentials as an activist and as somebody involved in environmental action. But let me ask you, what exactly is the problem? I want to assume that President Tinubu means well. He says oil production should resume in Ogoni land. President Buhari made a similar effort, I think in 2022. Before him, I think even President Obasanjo, as far back as 2006, 2016, visited 2006, visited Ogoni land with the same appeal. But Ogoni elders, stakeholders, every time any president says, let's solve this problem, they will say, no, you are putting the cart before the horse. What is the matter this time around with the president who says he wants to restore hope? And are those oil wells in Ogoni State, Ogoni land, that are very versatile, producing up to about 60% at certain times, should begin production again. Shell and Chevron, should be allowed to return. What exactly is the problem? How is the cart before the horse in this matter?
Well, Abati, I think the approach has also been the biggest challenge. I mean, just as you mentioned now, the approach about focusing on oil resumption. If you look at when this whole thing started in the early 90s, just as you mentioned, there have been a series of meetings. We had the first meeting, high-level meeting, then with Aliyu Mohammed in 1993. And then in 1994, the Tibet Committee led a ministerial team to Ogoni. And after that, nothing happened. In 2001, of course, the Oputa panel also engaged with this process. And that gave birth, of course, after 2001, we had the Kuka-led process. And just as you mentioned, Obasanjo came here a couple of times. And after then, we've had all these other visits. I think the challenge has been, just like you mentioned, putting the issue of oil resumption as a basis for the negotiation or talks. And that detracts from looking at the entire of the what you may call the Ogoni question or the Ogoni crisis. And I think that part of that situation is coming from the way the media have presented this whole issue. I had the invitation to come to Abuja, and the invitation was all about meeting with the president. And I think, in fairness to him, in his presentation, he actually talked about addressing the issue of injustice, addressing the issue of development, and of peace and regulation in Ogoni, which for me is the centerpiece of the engagement. But when the media went out, the report is Ogoni leaders are meeting the president for oil resumption, which for me is the wrong way of communicating the message. And that is what is putting, what you see to be a pushback to this whole engagement. Definitely, of course, the struggle will launch on the basis of the government responding to engage with the community. But every point that engagement is fashioned is always taken to attaining one objective, which just putting an issue of oil resumption as the main issue. Meanwhile, there are justice issues, there are development issues, there are peace issues that need to be put into all the package. I can remind you about it. What led the Kuka process to fail, because part of that process, was also this overemphasis on issue of oil resumption. Monsa was the group that demanded that before talking about claim, we need to do an environmental assessment. As part of our submission, we submitted what have been the environmental challenge in Ogoni. And then we raised issue about the political challenge and, of course, economic challenge. We asked Kuka to invite the different parties because these issues are supposed to be handled by different parties. The federal government will be brought to the table. Kuka did not at any point brought the federal government to the table. And that was why that effort failed in trying to deal with this whole issue. I welcome this present initiative with some cautious optimism, because in his statement, the president made it clear that he's looking at, addressing issue of injustice, addressing issue of development, addressing issue of, looking at issue of peace. And I think that should be our focus before even talking about oil resumption. Of course, you cannot just move into Ogoni and start drilling oil, looking at the fact you're talking about a community where over 2,000 souls were lost in the course of this repression, where over 14 communities were sacked until today people have not returned back to those communities. These are issues that need to be put on the table. And beyond that, the entire issue of energy security in the present day reality, how do we put that together in terms of this discussion? And I think that these are part of what we need to put on the table. But oftentimes, the government and those are handling the communication aspect put the issue of oil resumption, and that, at the end of the day, make them to have a pushback from the community, because you can't just talk about oil resumption. I think the message is the president has indicated interest to address the Ogoni question, or what you may call the Ogoni crisis. And then within the context of that discussion, of course, there will be issues raised from the government side, the issues raised from the community side, and then we'll come to some middle point. But to just put the whole thing about oil resumption in the front, of course, will make, people to push back on the whole issue. So I think that the messaging from the government side has not been quite good. And for me, of course, what I even put us into the process was because we hear about justice, because there have been issues of injustice around the Ogoni question. There have been issues of development challenge around the Ogoni question. And of course, how do we return the community back to peace?
Okay. If you can hear me, Mr. Legborsi, can you hear me now? Hello, Mr. Legborsi, can you hear me now?
Hello.
Okay,
yeah,
okay. I can hear you at this end. Well, you mentioned the Kuka committee. Now, that was, long before now. Now, the president has now appointed the National Security Advisor, Malam Nuhu Ribadu, as the facilitator. What is the guarantee that the stakeholders, the communities, from Bodo to Kogana to Amarato, Rukana, I hope I pronounced that well, who cooperate with
Gokana, Kana, Taelebe.
Okay, who cooperate with the National Security Advisor. because that's what the president is looking for, that there should be collaboration. Even under President Buhari, there was an attempt to repair the Bodo Road. There was this Bodo, I think Bodo Boni Road, that the government worked on in...
the Bodo Boni Road.
Bodo Boni Road. Even that did not pacify the people.
Yeah.
Now, what must happen now for the people of Ogoni land to listen to the government? This is another president. He too says, okay, let's solve this problem. You have said, well, the people, one of the things about the people are saying they must be in charge of the resources. I thought resource control was resolved before now. And Ogoni people have been paid compensation by Shell at one point, following a judgment by a court in the Netherlands, and also a Supreme Court judgment in Nigeria of about 49.3. Buhari started Bodo Boni Road. I don't know whether it's completed now. So, I mean, what else? Is it that it's only when the oil wells are handed over to your people that there will be peace?
That road is not completed. And when you talk about compensation, no compensation paid to Ogoni community. What happened was that a community in Ogoni, the Bodo community, took share to court in London, and there was some out-of-court settlement which resulted in payments. The payment was just to Bodo community and not to the entire Ogoni. Now, if you recall, but you remember that in the height of the Ogoni crisis, the United Nations General then, Boutros Ghali, and followed by Kofi Annan, set up a team, what they call the UN fact-finding team, that came to Nigeria. They visited Ogoni and also submitted a report. Part of that report, a recommendation, was that independent agency should be set up to address the economic condition of the Ogoni people and other minorities in the Niger Delta. That report also recommended that compensation should be paid to the families who lost lives in cause of this whole crisis. And if you can recall, as I said, Ogoni, during our preparation for the Oputa panel in 2000, I mean, if you can recall, Ogoni submitted over, I mean, the panel itself totally received about 10,000 plus petitions. Only Ogoni submitted over 8,000 petitions. We give you a graphic illustration of the level of human rights abuses, of killings that took place in Ogoni land. So, in terms of discussion, how do you look at this whole thing? How do you address the question of compensation to Ogoni community members who lost lives in the course of this crisis? How do you deal with the situation of lack of infrastructure? How do you deal with, because you see, today, in the best practice in the world today, I've said it before, discussion about development is no longer a question of government-company relationship. Today, development discourse shifted to government, community, and company relationship. So in that discussion, it now becomes, what is government going to get out of this? What is the company going to get out of this? And what is the community going to get out of this? So, and that is the sort of thing we need to look at. You are talking about oil exploration to start. What percentage of that is going to go back to the community? The community cannot just take the pollution and then you government and you, the company, take profit, the government take royalty. That is not obtainable, no, it's not obtainable anywhere. And that's the only thing we are challenging. If you want to do oil exploration, no problem. But what are you giving to the community as a fallback?
In other words,
if you know,
the community wants to control the resource. Is that the objective?
Of course, in the Ogoni Bill of Rights, it talks about the Ogoni people being given a fair proportion of the Ogoni community resources for Ogoni development. We've been managing society even before the intrusion of British colonial intervention. So you can't tell us at this stage that we cannot manage our resources. Even if it's 1% from the oil exploration, we can manage it.
No,
that's what we're telling the world.
That's
what we're telling the government. Even if it's 1%, 2%, we can manage it.
Mr. Legborsi, are you aware that, you know, within the purview of the extant law, all things, mineral resources below the surface of this Nigerian territory belongs to the federal government? That's what the law says.
There is something Martin Luther King says. He said any law that does not square with the moral law of the universe is unjust and should not be obeyed. The laws you are trying to tell me now are unjust laws. They were put in place to expropriate the resources of the oil-bearing communities and other communities in Niger Delta to fund a state that was created without our corporation. So those laws are unjust law and can be challenged
but there's also derivation. There's also derivation. You know, in all of these laws, including the PIA, which takes care of the interests of the communities. And the oil exploration communities have frameworks established for community relations.
What framework? About if you are following even the PIA discussion, even the so-called thing they call the host community, you can remember that we challenged it from the beginning. What you call host communities fund, you are taking 3% of OPEX, and then say you are giving, who is defining that? Who is defining the OPEX that the company is bringing? At what point can we come together to do that? So who is defining community? So even the PIA had its fraud with its own challenges because they never even got the community involved in putting it together. And one of those pieces of unjust laws that I don't think that morally, I mean, in terms of what the universal law will say to be support. But I think that here we had an offer. The president had, put up an invitation. We went there to hear from the president. And of course, just like the president said, go back home. We didn't say anything at that meeting because we were only going to hear the president. And after the president made his comment, we are going back home to Ogoni to tell our people what the president has said. So we got a variance of views from the community and then passed back to the government. So that is where we are.
Okay.
But as I said,
but it's the voice of the elite.
Everything depends
it's the voice
on
of the, elite
the commitment of the government.
Mr. Legborsi, it's the voice of the elite.
It's not the voice, is it?
Are we sure?
That is not the voice of the elite
themselves.
Okay. You see, that is what we are saying. Some people were, of course, they would not invite 1.something billion people to Aso Rock. Some people, I have led the process before as president of MOSOP. I led all the engagement that led to the current HYPREP. I know how we did it from Abuja to Geneva and back to Nigeria. I led the process. It was not the entire Ogoni. In fact, we were just about 30 of us nominated from the community. In this same way, those that have been nominated to engage in the process, we are going back to the community. We're going to call the Ogoni Congress. We are going to meet from kingdom to kingdom. Ogoni has 6 kingdoms and 2 special units. We're going to go back to those areas to let people know that this is what has happened. What are you saying we should present? So that is the way it's going to go.
Okay, you were involved in HYPREP. The profile that I read indicated that the hydrocarbon pollution remediation project, based on the recommendation of the United Nations Environment Program 2011, recommended for 2016, but it started in 2019. But you know that HYPREP, which was received with such high hope, ended up being something that is referenced as a center of corruption. That money released, resources provided, you know, the HYPREP became an opportunity for, you know, other people to enrich themselves at the expense of the common project, the common good. You were there. What happened in HYPREP?
Well, I was not just there. I was part of those who negotiated the HYPREP, and I was the MOSOP liaison in the time that UNEP was doing this assessment. And it was a thing that I was very much involved. Of course, in the initial governing council that I served, we set up the framework, and after that, of course, after our tenure elapsed, we left. The issue is that what we negotiated was supposed to be a semi-autonomous entity, but at the moment, like every other Nigerian project, there are attempts, of course, to do benefit capturing, and that is part of the reason why, beyond being part of, from my civil society perspective, of course, we'll be demanding that HYPREP need to operate within the ambits of transparency, accountability, and of course, effective community participation in the process, which, of course, I see some improvement in that. There have been some challenges, no doubt. There have been some issues raised. There have been some attempts, and part of the crisis have been that the over-bureaucratization of HYPREP, which I've communicated before now that this is not what it's supposed to be. I think there's some improvement I'm seeing in the process at the moment, far better than what has been obtaining in the past few years. And I think that they will be hearing from us, and not just us, but other community members who are making complaints. I think that is the way it should go.
Okay, at the meeting with the president by the Ogoni elders and stakeholders, the governor of Rivers State, Governor Pyagbara, said, oh, he had done the groundwork of consulting with communities in Ogoni land. And at that meeting was the fruit of the efforts that he had made. Did he really consult with the people of Ogoni land before that meeting took place? Because it's surprising that people are now saying, oh, the president doesn't quite exactly know what is going on. Is this a fault on the part of the governor, not consulting enough?
Well, I don't think there have been that level of effective consultation. The president's invitation actually was, for me, there may have been a couple of that, but I think that for us, the take-up point is from where we met with the president. And the agenda being set by the president, for me, is what we have to be working on, which is that go back, consult with their people, and come back. At this point, let me just also inform all of us, at this point, there is no negotiation that is going on. We only went to Abuja to hear the president, and just like we agreed as a community that we're not going to say anything because we need to go back to our people, get the feedback before we go back to say this is what our people are saying. So the group did not make any serious, didn't make any comment at that meeting because it had the invitation of the president to hear him, and after the president said what he has said, of course, ours is to return back home, get back to the community, and say this is what the president has said. What do you want us to present to him? I think that is the point that we are. I think after we've done the consultation, collected the views of our people, put together, that we can now go back to say this is what we are saying. I think that will now begin the negotiation. At this point, no negotiation has taken place. So for those who are saying they negotiate to bring oil resumption, that is totally false. No negotiation has taken place at this point. What happened was purely government informing the Ogoni delegation that this is government thinking, this is president thinking. Particularly putting himself in our shoes that, yes, your sons and daughters campaign with me in Nigeria, in Europe, in America, during our fight against military dictatorship. So I understand the issues, I'm familiar with the issues. So that is the problem the president has given. So ours is to go back home, talk with our people, get back to the president to say this, and that is where, for me, the journey begins. At this point, it was just of an information gathering meeting, that is to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, Mr. Legborsi, Ogoni has about 33 oil and gas fields, including the fields at Oza, the fields at Asaramutu. These are very versatile oil fields that between 1976 and 1991 gave Nigeria over 2 million barrels of oil. Now, there are scholars who have written papers saying that this oil, belongs to all of us, that these are sedimentary deposits. Some of them have argued that in fact this oil, came from the north and got deposited in the south. Now, look, there are persons who think it looks like Ogoni land is, holding Nigeria to ransom, and people are asking for patriotism. Because if those 33 oil fields begin to function, Nigeria will make more money. At a time we need revenue for serious development. And that you cannot sit on something that belongs to all of us. I hope you have heard that argument before.
Well, we cannot move against what is happening internationally. Today we have a United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which quite recognize the right of communities to their resources. And Nigeria is part of the international community, and they cannot at any point say they will not respect what the international community has said. The United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Peoples, which was passed in 2007, clearly puts resources in the hands of communities. It says resources, their land, territories belong to them. So that's what I'm saying. I think we should start moving away from the state-centric management resources that we inherited from the British and start defining how we run our community, because these were communities that were well established before the intervention of British colonialism. So you can't say at this point that I have something at my backyard that it belongs to everybody. Yes, in as much as we believe in this context, just like Ogoni people said in the Bill of Rights. In the Bill of Rights, it said, while reaffirming our faith in the Federal Republic of Nigeria, we make the following demand upon the Republic as follows. We are not saying we are not part of Nigeria. We said, give a fair proportion of Ogoni community resources for Ogoni development. That's what is stated in the Ogoni Bill of Rights. We are not saying we're going to take all. We are saying, give us part of this for us to develop. That's what we said. Because there were times when this country depended on groundnut. People in the West were doing cocoa, they were doing groundnut, and they were doing palm oil, and they used that to run the economy. They used that to give scholarship. They used that to build some of the cocoa house, the Liberty Stadium, the first television stadium in the whole of Western in Africa, was built in Western region, took resources from cocoa, because they were allowed to do it on their own. Why are you not allowing those on the oil-bearing communities today? But let me just also tell you, why do we have a presidential initiative on gold mining that Zamfara can do gold mining and then I cannot do oil mining in the Niger Delta? That is purely injustice. Today, I was doing a work on lithium mining recently. You launched lithium mining in Nasarawa State. Niger is waking up to it. Kaduna is already talking about it. In fact, the other time before I left office, there already discussion on lithium mining, which is one source for renewable energy. All the states in Nigeria that do lithium mining now are already negotiating with different companies because it's a mineral. Why can't I do so in Ogoni? Why can't I do so in River State? So this whole thing is built on injustice that must be challenged. There's no reason why we should have dual laws. A law that deals with solid mineral different from a law that deals with oil mineral. Why must it be so? Why can't we have a harmonious law in terms of mineral exploitation in this country? People are busy mining gold in Zamfara, mining gold in other parts of the country, yet I cannot mine here. I cannot mine the one that is so, my own should belong to the nation. What belongs to that other state belongs to them. No, now it cannot work. There is a question related to distributive justice here. And then we must challenge.
Okay, on that note, I would like to thank you very much, Mr. Legborsi, Saro Pyagbara, for joining us on This Day Live, this Sunday talk show. Thank you very much indeed.